I found the evidence neatly tucked away in a shoebox, and I knew, the second my fingers brushed against that heavy bond paper, that my life, and frankly, the lives of everyone in our cozy little cul-de-sac, was about to shatter. I'm talking about a betrayal so complete, so coldly calculated, that it makes every soap opera plot look like a children's cartoon. I confronted my neighbors about this secret, a secret they had meticulously buried for over a decade, and what they confessed wasn't just shocking, it was completely soul-destroying. They looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes, the eyes I'd seen across the fence at countless summer BBQs, and I swear, a part of me died right there on their pristine porch. My question for you, for anyone listening right now, is simple, but it cuts right to the bone. When the people you trust most turn out to be the master architects of a lie that affects your family's entire future, were my actions, the actions I took to expose them and reclaim what was mine, too harsh, or was I completely justified? Tell me if you would have done the same thing, because I'm still living with the fallout. Let me take you back to the beginning, before I was the neighborhood pariah, before my name was whispered in hushed, judgmental tones. My name is Alex, and for 13 glorious years, I lived what I genuinely believed was the perfect suburban life in Northridge. It's the kind of neighborhood where people bake cookies for the new arrivals, where kids play street hockey until dusk, and where trust is as foundational as the concrete slabs under the houses. My best friends, the closest people I had outside of my immediate family, were Mark and Sarah, who lived directly across the street. Mark and I had met on the first day we both moved in. A classic story of two guys struggling to assemble flat-pack furniture and bonding over the sheer impossibility of the instructions. Sarah and my wife Emily were inseparable, sharing everything from gardening tips to the deeply private worries only mothers can understand. Our kids grew up together. Their oldest, Liam, is only 6 months older than my daughter Chloe. They called each other cousin. We went on joint family vacations to the coast every summer. Mark was the godfather to my son, Ben. When I say they were family, I mean it in the truest, most unqualified sense of the word. We shared meals, celebrated milestones, and leaned on each other through every crisis. Mark and Sarah were the stable, grounding force in my life. Mark was a calm, methodical accountant, the kind of guy who color-coded his spice rack. Sarah was a kindergarten teacher, all warmth and patience, with a smile that could genuinely disarm a charging bull. I trusted them implicitly. I would have literally given them the keys to my entire financial life, and for a long time I actually did, given Mark's profession and his willingness to help me with my annual taxes. The first faint crack in this perfectly constructed facade appeared about 6 months ago, and it was so insignificant at the time that I nearly dismissed it. It was a Tuesday evening, a week before Ben's 7th birthday. Mark and Sarah had come over for our weekly Taco Tuesday tradition. We were talking about something mundane, the rising cost of lumber for my ill-fated deck project, I think, when Mark's phone rang. It wasn't the sound of the ring that caught my attention, it was his reaction. He snatched the phone off the counter as if it were a venomous snake, his face instantly draining of color. He didn't even look at the caller ID. He just fumbled the power button, plunging the screen into darkness, and shoved the phone deep into his back pocket. His hand stayed clamped over the pocket, a gesture so defensive and sudden that it sucked all the air out of the room. He simply muttered something about it being a telemarketer, and immediately pivoted the conversation to a completely different, unrelated topic, something about a local charity drive. It was so jarring, so unlike the usually relaxed and jovial Mark, that a little alarm bell went off in my head. But Emily gave me a slight, imperceptible shake of her head, the universal "don't be a weirdo" signal, and I let it go. We finished the evening, and everything seemed normal, but that little flicker of tension, that brief, cold moment, stayed with me. A few weeks later, the second clue presented itself, and this one was even harder to ignore, mostly because it involved an object that shouldn't have been in my house. I was helping Emily clean out the attic, preparing for a garage sale. We were sifting through boxes of old baby clothes and holiday decorations when I found it, a slim, black legal binder tucked haphazardly inside a box of my old college textbooks, a box that hadn't been touched in at least 7 years. The binder was labeled simply, Northridge Property Records, 2012. Now, why would that be in my attic? My mind raced through the possibilities. Mark, being the neighborhood accountant and the most organized person alive, was the president of our voluntary homeowners association for a year back in 2012. He had probably used my house as a neutral meeting point a few times. Maybe left it here by accident and I just tossed it into a box. It was a logical, if slightly sloppy, explanation. I opened the binder, fully intending to just drop it off on his porch later that day. But that's when I saw the discrepancy. The first page was a master list of all the initial property sales in our cul-de-sac from 2012. It listed the address, the original sale price, and the owner. Everything looked correct until I got to my own address. Our sale price was listed as $410,000. I distinctly remembered paying $450,000. I paused, thinking I must be misremembering. It was 13 years ago, after all. I took out my phone and scrolled through old bank statements and closing documents. Sure enough, the final sale price, the number on the legally binding closing document, was $450,000. A $40,000 difference. It was a significant error. And coming from Mark, the guy who checked his work 5 times, it was almost unbelievable. I told myself it had to be a typo in the HOA records. I called Mark that evening, casually mentioning I found the binder and noticed the mistake. I expected a quick, dismissive apology and a promise to correct the old, irrelevant records. What I got was a strange, long silence, followed by a sudden, slightly panicked insistence that I should just leave the binder on his porch right away, and that he would personally shred the outdated information. "It's just old draft numbers, Alex, don't worry about it," he said too quickly. The speed and intensity of his reaction were what solidified my suspicion. Why the urgency? Why the mild undercurrent of panic? I didn't leave the binder on his porch. I put it in my safe, and the next day I began digging. I started by using an online public records search to pull up the original sale documents for all the houses on our street. I cross-referenced the prices in Mark's draft binder with the actual recorded sale prices. Here's what I found. Every single house except for Mark and Sarah's had a discrepancy. Most of them were small, a few $1,000s. But mine was the largest, the $40,000 gap. And then there was their house. Mark and Sarah's initial sale price, according to the binder, was listed as $395,000. The actual recorded sale price? Their $355,000. Exactly a $40,000 difference, but in the opposite direction. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of the math. It was too precise to be a coincidence. My neighbor's sale price was understated by $40,000. My sale price was overstated by $40,000. The total difference between the two numbers, the combined error, was $80,000. This wasn't a typo. This was a pattern, but what was the motive? And how was this even possible? This kind of transaction would require a staggering level of coordination and manipulation of official documents. The pieces started falling into place, slowly, terrifyingly. Mark, the meticulous accountant. Sarah, the trusted, charming confidant. A close friendship spanning 13 years. My gut, that deep, unsettling feeling I had ignored for weeks, was screaming at me. I remembered something I had forgotten. The day we closed on our house, back in 2012. We were first-time home buyers, naive and completely overwhelmed by the paperwork. Mark and Sarah, who had moved in 3 months before us, were so incredibly helpful. Mark had volunteered to look over all our financial documents. He was there during the final walkthrough. He even offered to drop off the final closing envelope at the title company, saying, "I'm going right by there anyway, let me save you a trip, buddy." I remember thinking how lucky we were to have such generous neighbors. Now, that memory tasted like ash. I realized that the $40,000 difference was almost certainly a cashier's check, laundered through the closing documents, an unrecorded side deal designed to benefit 2 people, Mark and the original developer, or perhaps even a corrupt element at the title company. Mark, the accountant, would have been the perfect middleman. He would have known exactly how to create a phantom payment, a slush fund to drop the price of his own house by taking a premium on mine, by overstating our sale price by $40,000, and underwriting the difference. He effectively funneled money that should have been his to pay into our final price, decreasing his own liability and using us, the clueless first-time buyers, as the collateral. He bought his house at a lower rate, and we paid the difference, unwittingly handing him a personal discount equal to a down payment. He didn't just save $40,000, he essentially got his house for $40,000 less than its true value, and he paid less in property taxes over the years because the recorded price was lower, and we bore the weight of a higher mortgage and higher property taxes. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. The next thing I did was something I'm not proud of, but I felt I had no choice. I had to confirm it. I couldn't confront him with just a binder and a suspicion. I needed solid proof. I started noticing their patterns. Mark was meticulous, but he was also predictable. Every Thursday, he went to his senior league bowling night, and Sarah went to her book club. Their house was empty for a 3-hour window. This past Thursday, I waited until I saw Mark's beat-up sedan pull out of the driveway, and Sarah's car followed 20 minutes later. I walked across the street, my heart hammering against my ribs, feeling like a common criminal. I went to the small storage shed in their backyard, which I knew Mark used as his home office overflow. He'd complained about it needing a better lock years ago. He was too cheap and too trusting to have fixed it. I jiggled the old padlock. It was stiff, but after a minute of maneuvering with a wire coat hanger, it gave way. Inside, the shed smelled of mothballs and old paper. I zeroed in on the gray filing cabinet. It was unlocked. I pulled open the bottom drawer labeled Personal Finance. And that's where I found it, the shoebox. It was labeled, in Mark's perfectly neat handwriting, Closing 2012. Inside, there wasn't just the contract for their house, showing the correct lower price. There was also the original certified copy of the escrow instructions for my house, which included a clear, itemized breakdown of a cashier's check for $40,000 made out to Mark S. Davies for services rendered, dated the day before our closing. And right next to it, the piece of evidence that made my blood run cold. A signed, notarized non-disclosure and mutual indemnity agreement between Mark and the original developer, stating that Mark would receive a commission for facilitating the closing of 2 specific properties, mine and theirs, at the agreed-upon rates, and that no party would disclose the actual final sale price of the homes for a period of 20 years. It was all there, in black and white, the proof of their absolute cold-blooded fraud. This wasn't a mistake. It was a criminal enterprise disguised as neighborly help. The walk back across the street felt like walking through cement. My best friend, the godfather to my son, had knowingly and methodically stolen $40,000 from my family on the biggest purchase of our lives, all to subsidize his own. He looked me in the eye for 13 years, shared meals, laughed at my jokes, and knew every single dollar he spent was, in part, a dollar he stole from me. The emotional betrayal was almost more devastating than the financial loss. I didn't say a word to Emily. I was numb, trying to figure out how to navigate this new, terrifying reality. I spent the next 48 hours in a fog, not eating, barely sleeping, just running the legal options through my head. Suing would be expensive, time-consuming, and would utterly destroy the community we lived in, dragging my innocent wife and children through a humiliating public ordeal. But letting them get away with it? That was simply not an option. Mark and Sarah had to face the consequences, but I wanted to be surgical. I didn't want a messy war. I wanted justice delivered with precision. So that's the situation I was in. The evidence was irrefutable. The betrayal was complete. They had 13 years of my trust, friendship, and family time built on a foundation of a $40,000 lie. I knew I couldn't go to the police yet. Not without talking to them first, not without giving them a chance to explain, a chance to acknowledge the sheer depth of their depravity. But more than that, I knew I had an unshakable moral right to reclaim what they had stolen. I had to make a choice. Do I prioritize the peace of the neighborhood and our children's happiness, or do I prioritize justice, even if it means ripping the mask off the 2 people my family trusted most? Before I tell you what happened next, the confrontation that changed everything, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have gone to the police immediately, or would you have tried to handle it yourself, face to face, risking an even messier outcome? Let me know your gut reaction. I decided on a direct confrontation. I owed myself that much. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized the game was over. I wanted to hear the justification for their years of deceit. I called Mark on Friday evening, keeping my voice utterly level. Hey Mark, can you and Sarah come over? I need to talk to both of you about something really serious, something important about the house. The tone of my voice, devoid of my usual camaraderie, must have been unsettling, because he hesitated. Is everything okay, Alex? What is it? It's fine, Mark. It's just business, private business. Tonight, please. He agreed, his voice tight. At 7:30 p.m., they walked across the street, carrying a bottle of wine, a futile gesture of normalcy. Emily was upstairs, feigning a headache. I didn't want her involved until I had the situation under control. I led them to the dining room table, where I had spread out all the documentation, neatly arranged. My original closing papers, the HOA binder, and the copies I had made of the documents from Mark's shed, the escrow instructions with the cashier's check, and the non-disclosure agreement. It was a beautiful, devastating display of their guilt. They sat down, Mark instantly noticing the organized piles of paper. Sarah's smile was still in place, but it faltered when she saw the file labels. I didn't offer them a drink. I didn't offer a preamble. I just sat down, leaned forward, and said the words that would end our 13-year friendship. Mark, Sarah, I know about the $40,000. Mark visibly flinched, a slight tremor running through his hands. Sarah, the master of composure, just blinked, her face freezing into a mask of polite confusion. I don't know what you mean, Alex, she said, her voice smooth as silk. I ignored her. I pointed to the papers. Don't insult my intelligence. It's all right here. The inflated price on my house, the suppressed price on yours, the cashier's check made out to you for services rendered on the day before my closing, and the 20-year non-disclosure agreement. You used me, Mark, an unsuspecting first-time home buyer, to subsidize the purchase of your own house. You were my friend. You were my son's godfather. You sat across from me for 13 years, knowing that every single moment was built on a $40,000 lie. The silence in that room was suffocating. Mark slowly lowered his head, not meeting my gaze. Sarah's composure finally snapped. Her eyes welled up, but not with shame, with indignation. It wasn't like that, Alex. It was a business decision. A one-time opportunity. We were struggling, we needed a break. It was the only way we could afford the house. The developer offered the arrangement. He was going to sell our house to a relative at a deep discount unless Mark facilitated the sale of yours to cover the difference. I scoffed. And you chose to victimize your best friends? You chose us? You stole from us? You took money that should have been in our kids' college funds? Money that took us years to save, so you could have a bigger kitchen? Mark finally spoke, his voice a broken whisper. I was going to pay it back, Alex, I swear. I was waiting for a big bonus. I kept the records so I could track the interest. I know it sounds terrible, but I always intended to correct it. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. 13 years, Mark. 13 years of Taco Tuesdays, joint vacations, and you never once had the decency to confess, to even hint at the truth. You kept those records to protect yourself, not to pay me back. That non-disclosure agreement wasn't about the developer. It was about ensuring I wouldn't find out until the statute of limitations had passed on the fraud. I laid out my terms, cold and precise. Here is how this ends. I'm not going to the police. I'm not reporting you to the state accounting board. I'm not filing a massive lawsuit that will drain all of our resources and ruin our children's lives. But you will rectify the situation, completely and immediately. I slid a document across the table. It was a simple, legally binding promissory note. You owe me the principal sum of $40,000. After 13 years of interest, compounded monthly at the standard legal rate, that number comes to exactly $78,350. 12. I had done the math meticulously. The shock on their faces was immediate. 78,000? Alex, that's outrageous. That's more than double. Sarah sputtered, tears now flowing freely. But still, I saw no remorse, only anger at the price tag. It's the cost of a 13-year interest-free loan you illegally forced on my family, Sarah. It's the money we could have earned, the money you prevented us from investing. And on top of that, you will cover all my legal fees for drawing up this note, which is another $5,000. I pointed to the final clause. The full amount, all $83,350 is due in a cashier's check to my attorney's office within 7 days. If it is 1 minute late or 1 penny short, all these documents go to the police, the accounting board, and the local newspaper. I will not hesitate to ruin both your professional lives and any reputation you have left in this community. The confrontation lasted another hour, filled with their pathetic pleas, their attempts to minimize the damage, to frame it as a mistake or a lapse in judgment. I held firm. I was a rock of unyielding fury. They finally signed the note, defeated and broken, with Mark's hand shaking so violently he had to steady it with the other. They walked out of my house that night not as friends, but as defeated criminals. The air was thick with the dust of a decade-long relationship that had disintegrated into nothing. The aftermath was exactly as messy as I feared, but the consequences were solely on their side of the street. 7 days later, the check arrived, exactly on time and for the full amount. Mark had apparently taken out a second mortgage on their house to cover the debt. It was a massive financial blow to them, a devastating and well-deserved reckoning. But the payment of the debt was only the first domino. I couldn't keep the money, a secret from Emily, and when I told her, showing her the evidence and the check, her reaction was a mixture of stunned disbelief and utter heartbreak. The betrayal of her best friend Sarah hit her harder than the financial theft. The friendship was over, completely and irrevocably. The problem was, you can't just end a relationship of that magnitude in a neighborhood like ours without causing a seismic event. When they tried to wave at us across the street, we didn't wave back. When they tried to attend a school event we were at, we pointedly left. Eventually, the cold shoulder became so obvious that the other neighbors noticed the hostility. The whispers began, and Mark and Sarah, in a desperate attempt to save face, started spinning a story. They claimed I had extorted them over an old business disagreement, that I was a bitter, greedy former friend trying to destroy their lives out of envy. It was a disgusting, manipulative lie. But because I had promised I wouldn't go public with the crime itself, only the financial demand, I couldn't publicly tell the full truth without reneging on my terms and potentially getting them thrown in jail, which was never my goal, but rather simply to get my family's money back. The truth is, while I got the money back, I lost my home. Not physically, but spiritually. The neighborhood became toxic. Half the neighbors believed Mark and Sarah's fabricated narrative of a greedy former friend. The other half, seeing the clear distress of two families who used to be so close, sensed a deeper, more malicious truth, but they were too afraid to take a side. My kids were the collateral damage. Liam and Chloe, those two kids who called each other cousin, couldn't understand why their parents suddenly weren't allowed to play together anymore. It led to heartbreaking, tearful questions. Emily and I knew we couldn't stay. The stain of the lie, the daily reminder of their fraudulent faces just across the street was too much. The constant tension, the silent judging stares, the complete lack of trust. It was unbearable. Within 6 months, we put our house up for sale. We sold it, moved across the state, and started over, leaving behind the perfect suburban life that turned out to be nothing more than a carefully constructed cage. Mark and Sarah still live in their house, the house they essentially stole from us, but I hear from a former neighbor that they are socially isolated, their reputation irreparably damaged by their own desperate attempts to lie their way out of a lie. The financial justice I served them was devastating, but the self-inflicted social death they now live in that neighborhood is, I hope, a far more satisfying form of consequence. I did what I had to do to protect my family's future, and I walked away from the ruin, head held high with our money back. I'll never forget the sting of that betrayal, the agonizing realization that the people you share your life with can harbor such cold malice. It taught me a lesson I hope none of you ever have to learn. Trust is a foundation, not a given, and when that foundation is built on lies, it's not just the structure that falls, it's everything that was inside. Like this video if you were on my side and believe I was fully justified in demanding that interest and the full amount. Subscribe for more stories like this where the good guy sometimes has to become the heavy to win. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I demand too much interest? Would you have gone to the police? Let me know. I'll see you all in the next story.